So this is a dried up Prismacolor marker. You gotta make sure it's dry, of course, and it doesn't actually leave anything. You know, you can draw on my hand. There's nothing on it. So it's basically just wetted, and you'll find that as you're cleaning this thing, the best thing I like to use is these little brushes. But then there's always these little, like, stubborn pieces of just flecks of dust. I'll just kind of swipe upward, like this way. Just kind of swipe all the dust, like, outward. But then every so often when you do come across, like, let's see, I think I came across one earlier. It's not there right now. But every so often when you do come across one that is like stubborn and just kind of not coming off, not really finding any. Oh, there's one right there. See that one right there? It's kind of stubborn. You just take this thing right here, and it's abrasive. And since it's actually dry and felt and sharp tip, you can reach in there and it's safe. And then you can just finish cleaning it off with the brush. Yeah, see? So now that little particle is gone. Yeah, and this will make sure that your sound is completely smooth. Definitely. All the diffraction from, dust. The autofouls here. Only autofouls here. It's also kind of like a Zen garden in a way. It's like soothing. So yeah, you kind of go from the inside out. And you ever notice what's kind of cool about the way that KEFs been doing the drivers is that it's pretty much a compression driver. This thing's pretty much like a face plug. It's like they took a compression driver and just reversed it. And then like the horn side of the compression driver, rather than compressing it out of the horn, it's using its back wave and filling up the meta disc, increasing sensitivity that way. So it gives the back chamber more capacity. So it basically behaves as if it's a chamber that doesn't actually have any specific capacity, and then they can tune it to whatever they want. But yeah, these markers are actually really useful. Yeah, and you can get into these little crevices like that if you wanted to. They added they finally added the little, what's it called? The sealed suspension system from this guy into this. So now there's actually a seal in here, in the metas. So it doesn't like congest and sneeze anymore. Because at louder volumes, they had a whole like, it was basically designed to make it so that you wouldn't play it too loud. Because if you played it too loud, it sounded like shouty. And it'll tell you to shut, to you're playing it too loud, and you're not appreciating the depth of the sound. You're just listening to noise. Because these are speakers you're supposed to listen deeply into, and not really speakers you're supposed to like rock out to. The metas, on the other hand, are actually meant more for like, rocking out. Whereas these were actually based off of the original like reference of all references, when they, decided that they needed to make a standardized pair of stereo speakers, and realized that obviously two mono speakers don't make a very good set of stereo speakers, and so they commissioned KEF and who was it, like Falcon and other companies to create a pair of speakers that they could use as reference across their entire BBC network that could be standardized and small enough that they could use to standardize the sound of all their broadcast trucks with their stations, to make sure that all the sound was coming through as it should. And the way they modeled it was after what was most important, the human voice. Because they figured if you got the human voice perfect, then everything else would fall into place, because what do humans know best is the human voice. And that became an axiom, pretty much, that like even infinity followed. Because it's true. I mean, like, how many people can really tell? So often people can't even tell the Doors don't have a basis. Or like, you can't tell the difference between like a viola and a clarinet, but you can always tell the difference between like, two vocalists. Even the same vocalist doing, backing vocalists of his own, using like, a different style of singing. And the way the voice works is interesting, because the way the crossover falls, it falls right in between where we whisper and where we speak tonally, which is also where we put all our phonetics, the linguistic barrier essentially, so that we could whisper and it's completely understandable even when I whisper. And if you actually try it yourself, you can actually whisper a melody. Because there's actually a phenomenon, since whenever you speak, you're also pairing the whisper with your speaking voice, so that when you do whisper, it suggests the harmonics that follow. So you could sing in a whisper. You could sing the Star Spangled Banner. That's like 2.5 octaves in a whisper. And you can speak like tonal languages in a whisper. Like completely fine. And like the whisper section of your voice and the phonetic comprehensible like band is also what we call the brightness band. And that was pretty much where the issue was when you try to combine two mono speakers, is that like it gets too loud, it gets too like abrasive when you try to mix two mono speakers together. And the crossovers have it so that both the speakers are playing, the tweeter and the woofer, the crossover. As they're crossing over, you actually end up having two of the drivers playing at the same time, playing the same pitch, which is causing all sorts of issues that don't exist with mono. And you're also getting issues where, because you're not listening to speakers like you're listening to the way you used to listen to what's it called, mono speakers was like they were TVs. You put them like in the middle, and everyone kind of just gather around them and listen to like FDR or whatever. But with these with stereo speakers, people would actually put them side by side and toward walls. So the crossover even had worse of an effect to deal with, because now you're dealing with the reflections of the two as well. So you're basically dealing with the sum of the tweeter, the woofer, and the reflections all playing the same notes, which caused a lot of fatigue in that region, because that's the region that your ears are most sensitive to. This gap right here should be sealed, and I've been experimenting with different ways to seal it. I've been thinking about using an actual condom to seal it, but the way they did it was they just used the same style as what they did to this guy, and they just made another surround on the inside. Whereas these, when you play them too loud, there's actually a breakdown in like the way this thing works. Since the air is supposed to come out sideways, that's like the point of these of the radiation, like the tangerine radiator versus the horn, is that the horn directs the air directly at this section here, which replaced the flat section that used to exist. There used to be a flat flare that existed prior to this, and that would pretty much make measurements look happy. But it was never actually intended to be listened to that way, because you're never really supposed to be listening to KEFs on axis anyway. But in showrooms, you'd have to have people listen to them, so people tended to listen to them also on axis, even though you're not supposed to. And some people still listen to them on axis, even though they're not supposed to. But when you see people using them properly, they're always towed straight, and then you listen to them in their single point glory from the flare. Since there's actually a really cool test you could do, where you can just sit in front about this close and listen, and you'll hear the tweeter, and you'll hear kind of like a phantom tweeter coming from the outside. And if you shift to the side, you suddenly hear the sound all start coalescing to here. And then as you back up, it kind of just expands to encompass the whole entire driver. So this driver design right here was designed based off of the old-fashioned methodology of using basically making it as if it has no baffle at all, right? It's convexed, so that way the baffle has no actual acoustic function, and the acoustic function ends right here. This is the outer waveguide, and at close distance, you actually can hear sound radiating from the tweeter coming from this thing. And so when you're doing tests, it's almost like they're cheating, but it's kind of smart in the sense where since they already know how the test works, they're just gonna tune the way that it works by shaping this thing and making it the consistency they want, so that when you do test it, with the microphone like this, and then like this, and like this, you're getting the sum of this and this. Whereas when you back up and then listen to it like this, you're not actually hearing this anymore, because it's too quiet. You're only hearing the tweeter and the woofer as a single point. So the way that KEF measures and the way that KEF is actually meant to be used are two completely different things, which is pretty interesting. And I guess that's probably why they pioneered the computer assimilation technique, is so they could have these two functions where it would actually have a sound that was appropriate and created a chart that looked pretty good when measured like a mono speaker, but would still sound good when actually listened to the way it's supposed to be, like this. There's a lot of speakers that actually like, and that's kind of why I don't really like the mono speaker test very much, is that it kind of seems to limit the speaker design. Because yeah, of course, if you pretend like we all listen to mono and we test speakers like they're on mono speakers, and then we put them in the middle of the room, and you have a whole bunch of people listen to them as if they're mono speakers, and you also add some of them trained listeners like they do in the tests, then yeah, you're gonna prove to yourself, you're gonna basically fish lab results saying that like those tests are, you know, legitimate and people like that, but you're really just creating like a feedback loop. But what's cool about the way KEFs doing things is that they're actually setting up a completely different style of speaker, where it actually is meant to sprawl outward first and then toward you, so that a speaker like this has a deeper flare and has practically a flat diaphragm compared to this. This thing's more like you cut off a piece of a ping pong ball. This thing's more like you cut off a piece of like the top of, I don't know, like an orange. Like it has a very, very it's practically a flat diaphragm, really. But the flare is really, really deep, as you can tell. The horn's really deep, and it actually manages to sound larger than it looks because it's deliberately utilizing the baffle, breaking the tradition in the sense where the baffle is actually, you know, a contour that's a crescent shape. See? So there's actually a steeper angled horn here, and then a shallower horn this way. So this thing is actually meant to disperse sound wider than it does tall, which makes a lot of sense because when you have KEFs, you're supposed to aim them straight. So when you have them straight, you'd want them to be able to cross over as far as like their ability to sum, like left and right. You'd want them to be able to sum even when they're pointed straight. Ravel does something pretty interesting where they do it kind of like the opposite way, where they have a very quick fall off. So that way they have like a lot more control over like the way you toe them, and that's how they deal with like sad reflections and stuff. Is that they actually don't have as broad of a dispersion, but instead they try to make the speaker sound really tall. And actually, you look at the design of the XQs and IQs, they kind of did the same thing, where the top, I can show you in a second. They actually have waveguides that actually have a dispersion that is taller than wide as well, because they're trying to make it so that their tower speakers sound unified, as if the tweeter is actually as large as the entire tower. Yeah, that's good enough. Yeah, so they're just like a standard, just yeah, and then you just give it a little, give it a blow job, and then you give it a rim job, like that. Yeah. Yeah, and then you finish it off. And I can show you how they actually used to use the teal trick. It was funny because like teal obviously also did. You look at the way that the horn is directed. The horn is actually directed exactly at I get it. It's really hard to get. There we go. So when this tweeter is shining downward, wherever the woofer is, whether it's receded or whether it's, let's say I was to push this in, when it's, this then becomes a flat flare that is aligned with this thing, so that the tweeter, no matter what, will either bounce off of here or it'll meet with here, and then either way the sound will end up dispersing back towards you, and you don't get any waste that way. The way they did it before was like this. These guys are also really handy. So blowjob machine. Oh yeah, I just want to show you, like, if you're using like one of these things, I would not suggest pointing the gun directly at the tweeter. That could cause disaster. I would always go at an angle, like this. Yeah, because the tweeter is pretty robust, but that much air pressure going right into the tweeter doesn't seem like a good idea to me. So I've never tried doing that, and I probably will never. So I'm warning others, not based off of personal experience of having caused any damage, but I would imagine it just wouldn't be very good for the suspension for the tweeter. Yeah. So this is the entire flare, right? So if I were to push it inward, then you can see how this part, which is flat, actually goes inward and creates a rim that is pretty much like a flat flare. And no matter what, the tweeter will always find its way to either bouncing off of the flare or hit the outer rim. And if you were to check out how the new KEFs are designed, and what's kind of interesting is that when they made the blacks, you could tell how they actually took all the different all the different woofers and just kind of made them as black as possible, because they ended up with like a greenish color. Because it's kind of hard to really get jet black, but it's black enough. It looks black, but it's more like a forest green. Kind of wish it was actually really black, but that's good enough. But yeah, so this whole entire thing is, remember, tweeter, horn, radiator, dome, proportions, flare, and then a flattened region, right? Same applies here, right? This whole entire thing is a flare, and then there's a flattened region actually right here. That's why they receded this around. And notice how the woofer is actually like a three-dimensional form. It's designed so that the horn guides the whole entire, the horn basically follows the contour of the flare, and then it meets with this outer rim right here, which basically treats the whole entire. So this would be like, this is a single flare. The middle right here would be a single point, and then there'd be a waveguide around the outside, which is the tangerine waveguide, and then this thing would be a single unit, and then this would be the waveguide to the single, right, to the middle, and then this whole entire thing would be a single point, and then that single point would use this as the outer waveguide, and outside of that would be the actual entire baffle. The entire baffle shape being a crescent shape means that it would actually disperse sound more widely than vertically. So that way when you point them straight, they would actually overlap and create a balanced sum between them. So just look at the proportion of the tweeter and the flare, and what would be the outer rim. Again, the flare, the tweeter, the horn, and the outer rim. So this is the XQ40 driver. That's the flare. And that's the tweeter, the horn, and the same thing, right? It looks pretty much like it is actually the same proportion. But you back off, you'll notice that they're using the teal trick. There's actually a flat flare around the outside, and that isn't actually meant to be used. It gives it more power as far as, it is more surface area, so it does give it more thrust. But this thing was never meant to be a woofer. These were meant to be woofers, and this thing wasn't meant to move really that much. But the way this was meant to be used was not like this. It was still meant to be used like this. But you think about the limitations, look at even the way the light's shining off of it. See how the light's shining off of it? You're supposed to listen to it where the light is shining right now. So if you were to listen to it from the front, you'd be hearing a phantom. You'd be hearing basically the sum of the tweeter and this, which kind of gave it like a artificial measurement. But in real life use, you'd actually be listening to it like this. The flare is actually where you'd actually get the merging of the single point sound, where the high frequencies and low frequencies would actually have, infinite tries to reach you, since it's like billiard balls, right? Since the parabola and the tweeter, cast an orb, and so at any given point, the parabola right here is facing you, but they still had to have this outer rim on the outside. They changed that, and what's funny was that they actually, in this series, they actually experimented with that first using the center speaker, oddly enough. So see that very teal like? If you were just to eliminate this flare in the center, you would have a teal. Teal speakers just have this outer flare, and then they have really, really big, like a gigantic dome tweeter in the center. And that's how their speakers are meant to be used, and you're supposed to kind of point them at you. And that was how they differentiated themselves. But check this out. In experimenting with the IQ series, they also made one that was actually an experimental step forward. That was actually a lot more modern than you would think, and this thing is actually in general very cool. I mean, look at these like dramatic angles I could get for it. It's like all curved in the front, just the woodwork and everything. That's why I like the IQ style, is that the woodwork is like it's just amazing how they build the wood like that. But notice how the surround itself is actually flared so that it actually continues and hits this outer rim right here. So this would be the first instance of them doing work where the driver actually uses elements outside of the unit-Q to augment the sound, since this is actually meant to be listened to on axis. While, when you listen to it over here, it'll still have maximum flare. Or you listen over here, you still have maximum flare. And it doesn't actually have that teal-like outer flat rim. So that's probably
where they got most of their tests done before they hopped over to this guy, which does exactly the same thing. You notice that it's entirely a flare, and then it's a dipped, recessed surround, and then a lip, like a parabola that then flattens. If you compare this, you can see the same geometry. See how this is rounded here, and then it flattens? And how this is a horn all the way out to even the surround is part of the horn, and it extends into this thing. They're able to do much more with that with this, using the tangent waveguide, especially in the horn. It extends all the way out, passes around, and then it hits this thing. And that's how they're able to fully experiment with getting pretty much. These right here are the 301 SEs, which are like the they're actually literally the basis of the blade. But the 3000X series in general was actually the piecemeal reboot of KEF. Like every single thing about it ended up being used as like converged into all new KEF designs. Like if you look at even like the subwoofer, if you take half of the high frequency sound of the subwoofer, that is the new low frequency driver that they use. It's a sandwich design where they attach the ABR directly to the cone. Whereas in the HTB, it's actually, two cones. So they ended up just merging the two, and it became a single cone that was able to block the back waves where the back cone is rear vented, while the front is a long throw driver, and it doesn't have to deal with any issue with its own rear ring distortion. So that's how the HTB2 became the T2 Slimline. It's a bigger box, and you're supposed to place it up against the back wall, something like that, to help increase like the bass, because they didn't have a rear radiator that would extend the frequency down lower. And it's a simpler build, but it accomplished what they needed, which was somehow to make a driver that was able to play back to back with another active driver while somehow not causing any ring distortion between the two. And that's what the blade needed. Also, something that I want to point out that's really neat is, check this out. The way they designed these drivers, listen to the timbre. This is titanium. This chamber and this chamber and this chamber are all sealed. They're not. So that's not the Helmholtz frequency or anything like that. In fact, this to this is the same ratio as this to this, and it's basically phi. And they actually managed to make a titanium, the timbre of the titanium driver, the same as the timbre of the paper composite. That's pretty rad. So what's interesting is that if you look at the way this thing doesn't have the outer teal rim, it's actually, they basically took a step backward so that they could take a step forward. So now this whole entire thing again is a flare, just like the other speaker was, and it no longer has that flat outer rim on the outside. Instead, to supplement it, it has this, which is supposed to be a surround, but it's really actually acoustically active, and it sums with the tweeter. Anyway, thanks.